Hey everyone, hope you're having a great day. You're listening to the RX Daily Dose. Today's episode is being recorded for Monday, June 22nd, and I'm your host, Ian Parnagoni. We update this podcast for healthcare providers, medical professionals, and anyone who has an interest in drug updates. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on all your favorite podcast platforms and social media, including iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram. All links can be found in the show notes below. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the approval of Uplinza for NMOSD, Zepzelca for metastatic small cell lung cancer, and new indications for Tivicay and Alaris. I've also included times in the show notes, so feel free to skip ahead to a specific topic. Getting started, the FDA approved inebilizumab, which goes by brand name Uplinza, an injection for intravenous use for the treatment of neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder, known as NMOSD, in adult patients with a particular antibody against AQP4. NMOSD is a rare autoimmune disease of the central nervous system that mainly affects the optic nerves and spinal cord. Uplinza is only the second approved treatment for the disorder. In patients with NMOSD, the body's immune system mistakenly attacks healthy cells and proteins in the body, most often those in the optic nerves and spinal cord. Individuals with NMOSD typically have attacks of optic neuritis, which causes eye pain and vision loss. Individuals can also have attacks resulting in transverse myelitis, which often causes numbness, weakness, or paralysis of the arms and legs, along with loss of bladder and bowel control. Most attacks occur in clusters, days to months to years apart, followed by partial recovery during periods of remission. Approximately 50% of patients with NMOSD have permanent visual impairment and paralysis caused by NMOSD attacks. According to the National Institutes of Health, women are more often affected by NMOSD than men, and African Americans are at greater risk of the disease than are Caucasians. Estimates vary, but NMOSD is thought to impact approximately 4,000 to 8,000 patients in the United States. NMOSD can be associated with antibodies that bind to a protein called aquaporin 4. Binding to the anti-aquaporin 4 antibody appears to activate other compounds of the immune system, causing inflammation and damage to the central nervous system. The effectiveness of Uplinza for the treatment of NMOSD was demonstrated in a clinical study of 230 adult patients that evaluated the efficacy and safety of IV Uplinza. In the trial, 213 of the 230 patients had antibodies against AQP4. During the 197-day study, the risk of an NMOSD relapse in the 161 anti-AQP4 antibody-positive patients who were treated with Uplinza was reduced by 77% when compared to the placebo treatment group. There was no evidence of a benefit in patients who were anti-AQP4 antibody negative. The prescribing information for Uplinza includes a warning for infusion reactions, potential depletion of certain proteins, and potential increased risk of infection, including progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy and potential reactivation of hepatitis B and tuberculosis. The most common adverse reactions in the NMOSD clinical trial were urinary tract infection, headache, joint pain, nausea, and back pain. The FDA advises healthcare professionals to inform females of reproductive age to use effective contraception during treatment with Uplinza. Vaccination with live attenuated or live vaccines is not recommended during treatment and should be administered at least 4 weeks prior to initiation of Uplinza. Uplinza also received orphan drug designation, which provides incentives to assist and encourage the development of drugs for rare diseases. The FDA also granted accelerated approval to lurbinectedin, which goes by brand name Zepzelca, for adult patients with metastatic small cell lung cancer with disease progression or after platinum-based chemotherapy. Efficacy was demonstrated in a multi-center open-label multi-cohort study enrolling 105 patients with metastatic small cell lung cancer who had disease progression or after platinum-based chemotherapy. Patients received Zepzelca 3.2 milligrams per meter squared by IV infusion every 21 days until disease progression or unacceptable toxicity. The main efficacy outcome measures were confirmed overall response rate, determined by investigator assessment using RECIST 1.1, and response duration. Among the 105 patients, the overall response rate was 35%, with a median response duration of 5.3 months. The most common adverse reactions, including lab values, were myelosuppression, fatigue, increased creatinine, increased alanine aminotransferase, increased glucose, nausea, vomiting, decreased magnesium, and diarrhea. The recommended Zepzelca dose is 3.2 milligrams per meter squared every 21 days. This indication was approved under accelerated approval based on overall response rate and duration of response. Continued approval for this indication may be contingent upon verification and description of clinical benefit in confirmatory trials. This review was also conducted under Project Orbis, an initiative of the FDA Oncology Center of Excellence. Project Orbis provides a framework for concurrent submission and review of oncology drugs among international partners. For this application, a modified Project Orbis was undertaken because of the timing of submission to other regulatory agencies. The FDA is collaborating with the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration. The FDA approved this application 2 months ahead of the goal date, and the review is ongoing for the Australian TGA. The FDA also approved a new indication for dolutegravir, which goes by brand name Tivicay and Tivicay PD, to treat HIV-1 infection in pediatric patients at least 4 weeks old and weighing at least 3 kilograms, in combination with other antiretroviral treatments. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, at the end of 2016, there were 2,238 children younger than 13 years old living with HIV in the U.S. and dependent areas, with 99 new HIV-1 infections diagnosed in this age group in 2017. Effective treatment is important in reducing the amount of virus in the blood. Tivicay and Tivicay PD are intended to treat pediatric patients at least 4 weeks old and 3 kilograms who have never been treated for HIV or who have been treated but not with an integrase strand transferase inhibitor class drug. The safety and effectiveness of Tivicay and Tivicay PD were supported by a trial that included 75 HIV-1 infected infants, children, and adolescents, 4 weeks to less than 18 years old. The average age was 27 months old in the trial. This trial, where both the researchers and subjects knew which treatment was being administered, along with another trial, showed that the safety, effectiveness, and pharmacokinetics of Tivicay and Tivicay PD in pediatric patients was comparable to adults taking Tivicay. At 24 weeks, 62% of pediatric patients taking Tivicay or Tivicay PD had an undetectable viral load, that's the presence of virus in the blood, and at 48 weeks, 69% had undetectable viral load. Also, on average, study subjects had higher levels of CD4 cells, those are the cells that help the body fight off infection. The most common adverse reactions observed in adult patients treated with Tivicay were insomnia, fatigue, and headache. Patients with a hypersensitivity to dolutegravir should not take Tivicay or Tivicay PD. Tivicay and Tivicay PD should not be administered with dofetilide. Some patients reported hypersensitivity reactions such as rash and organ dysfunction. Patients should discontinue Tivicay or Tivicay PD if signs or symptoms of hypersensitivity reactions develop, as a delay in stopping treatment may result in a life-threatening reaction. Patients taking Tivicay regimens have reported liver toxicity. Patients with underlying hepatitis B or C may be at increased risk for worsening or elevated liver enzyme levels and should be monitored. Patients in the first trimester of pregnancy should consider an alternative treatment to Tivicay due to the risk of neural tube defects and should be counseled about effective contraception. Immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome, where the immune system begins to recover but then responds to a previously acquired infection with an inflammatory response that unexpectedly makes symptoms of the infection worse, has been reported in patients treated with combination antiretroviral therapy, including Tivicay and Tivicay PD. Tivicay tablets and Tivicay PD tablets for oral suspension are not substitutable for one another on a milligram per milligram basis. This application received priority review designation, under which the FDA's goal is to take action on an application within 6 months where the agency determines that the drug, if approved, would significantly improve the safety or effectiveness of treating, diagnosing, or preventing a serious condition. The FDA also approved canakinumab, which goes by brand name Ilaris, for the treatment of active Still's disease, including adult-onset Still's disease. Ilaris was previously approved for systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis in patients aged 2 years and older. AOSD is a rare and serious autoinflammatory disease of unknown origin. Autoinflammatory diseases are caused by abnormalities of the immune system, which trigger an inflammatory response that can damage the body's own tissues. Characteristics of AOSD have considerable overlap with systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, which includes fever, arthritis, rash, and elevated markers for inflammation. The overlapping features of AOSD and SJIA suggest this disease is a disease continuum rather than two separate diseases. The role of interleukin-1, a type of cytokine important in regulating the body's immune system, is well established in AOSD and SJIA. Ilaris works by blocking the effects of interleukin-1 and suppressing the inflammation in patients with this autoinflammatory disorder. The safety and efficacy of Ilaris for the treatment of patients with AOSD was established using comparable pharmacokinetic exposure and extrapolation of established efficacy of Ilaris in patients with SJIA, as well as the safety of Ilaris in patients with AOSD and other diseases. Common side effects reported by patients treated with Ilaris are infections, abdominal pain, and injection site reactions. The prescribing information for Ilaris includes a warning for potential increased risk of serious infections due to interleukin-1 blockade. Macrophage activation syndrome is a known life-threatening disorder that may develop in patients with rheumatic conditions, in particular Still's disease, and should be aggressively treated. Treatment with immunosuppressants may increase the risk of malignancies. Patients are advised not to receive live vaccinations during treatment. Ilaris was also granted priority review designation, under which the FDA's goal is to take action on an application within 6 months, where the agency determines that the drug, if approved, would significantly improve the safety or effectiveness of treating, diagnosing, or preventing a serious condition. And that's all I have for right now. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'll include all links in the show notes below, so please go back and check those out too. Please connect with me on any of your social media platforms and give me feedback on what you heard today. I'd love to know what you thought about the episode. And as always, feel free to like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.